Up, hey, oh, we're
Ho
live.
ho. Hey,
Oh,
we are
oh,
live. Calling Chris Anderson in beautiful Windsor,
it is beautiful
UK.
Wednesday. Yeah, we had sunshine today. Cold as hell, but we had sunshine.
Fantastic.
Not Chicago cold, but you are in
I am in
Chicago. You are like
Chicago. I flew in
home to
last
wash your
night.
socks, right?
I fly out tomorrow morning. But
Dedication.
I'm happy to be here today to be
I know.
with you.
I know you are.
Yeah, welcome everybody to History Happy Hour. Thanks to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for helping us to bring you this show. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. And whether you're watching live, watching on replay, or listening to the HHH,
Podcast.
very good. We're glad you're here. And today we're going to be talking about what happened to the World War II veterans when they came home. So please let us know what you're drinking. Are you drinking something, Chris?
I am, of course.
You got your
Afraid.
scotch.
Yeah.
I've got a haphazard beer. So
Okay.
I
Wait,
am.
you hold it up again? You can read a newspaper through that. That's not a beer.
It is a beer.
You
It
say
is
so.
an India Pale Ale. It's pale.
It's an India extremely pale ale.
It's a very pale ale. And Chris is criticizing my drinking habits, which I deserve because I was giving him a hard time before the show
Right.
started. We should thank everybody who supports us on Patreon, especially our top shelf patrons.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you can join this group by clicking on patreon.com/history happy hour. And really, we'd appreciate it if you would do that because that really does
Yes.
help us keep the show running, and it keeps us able to pay Cheryl and do other things to be able to move forward. Chris, do we have anybody out there watching?
Yeah, we do. Brett from Toronto, Lizzie from London, Jim from cloudy and cool Phoenix, Ron from Jupiter, Florida, Wally from the heart of the Midwest, which is an awfully
Right,
big
which is
for
right
that.
here, and I'm
Chicago,
looking
I
around,
thought.
Wally, and I don't see you. So
Yeah, right.
okay.
Okay. So, and Xavier from Spain. So we're
Oh,
international.
fantastic, fantastic. Well, should we start the show and give him
We
something?
should.
All
We
right,
should.
let's go.
The bar is open.
The bar is open. What do we got? What's going on?
Yeah. Well, this week we are joined by David Nasaw, and David is a historian, two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist, and the best-selling the author of *The Last Million*, which, according to The Economist, is one of the 6 must-read books of the Second World War. He is also the author of *The Patriarch*, which was recognized by the New York Times as one of the 5 best nonfiction books of the year. Andrew Carnegie, which was the winner of the New York Historical Society American History Book Prize, and The Chief, which received the Bancroft Prize.
So he's like way ahead of us.
Oh,
right?
I'm not even. Yeah, I'm not even.
I
I'm
mean,
still
this is
catching up.
this race has been won already.
Yeah, I think so. He's the Arthur M. Schlesinger Professor of History Emeritus at SUNY Graduate Center and past president of the Society of American Historians, amongst other things.
Okay.
But we are here this week to talk about his new book, The Wounded Generation. Oh, my better. Coming Home After World War II, which I've been really excited about, and I was not at all disappointed. So we're very happy to have David on to talk about his new book.
David, welcome to History Happy Hour.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you.
Before Chris gets in and asks the first question, I'm gonna leap in to mention that Chris and I got a message from our friend Matt Brogy, our fellow Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours
Top
guide.
Shelf patron.
And Matt says that he was involved with your book. Is this true?
Absolutely. Yeah. Not being a military historian myself, I needed someone to go over the manuscript and correct my errors and hopefully not add any errors of his own.
And you trusted him?
Matt did fine both ways. He corrected my errors and, as far as I know, added nothing incorrect.
But if we find anything wrong, we should blame Matt.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think we all can agree on that. All right, Chris, take it away.
So, David, I mean, aside, the book was fantastic, and we're going to get into the details of it. But it reminded me of a story or a time that I was speaking to a veteran. As many of our viewers know, I was really very, very close to a lot of the Easy Company veterans, and I was interviewing Forrest Guth, who was one of the Band of Brothers, one of the Easy Company guys. I talked to him many, many times before. We talked about the war. I would spent the weekend with him. And we were doing the usual interview, talking about the war and D-Day and Bastogne and all the stuff. And we got towards the end of the interview, and I said, so, Forrest, if you could sum up for me, how important was your Easy Company experience to you and all this sort of stuff. And I'll never forget it. He got very serious. He leaned forward in his chair and he said, Chris, I'm very, very proud of my time in Easy Company. But if you want to know what I'm proudest of, it was being a teacher for 40 years and being a father. That's what I want on my tombstone. And it just knocked me back because I thought, we know so much about these people, but it's only a small portion of their life. And they went on to do all these other things. And there's almost nothing written about that. And I was reminded of that moment reading your book. So just to start, why do you think we know chapter and verse about what happened to these people from 1941 till May of 1945, and then it just stops?
Part of the reason is the historians, speaking of myself, not the two of you, have jumped from when I taught my courses, whether they were to, community college students, graduate students, people in between. You go from the end of World War II right into the Cold War.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, you're in Korea.
Yeah.
So it short-circuited the history. We do not talk about the immediate post-war experience other than to prepare for the Cold War, which is on its way. That's number one. Number two, the veterans didn't talk. They talked about the war when pressed and pushed and prodded. But they didn't talk about homecoming. And they didn't talk about homecoming, I think, because it was too complex. It was too complicated. There were too many emotions running through their minds, their hearts, their souls. One of the I have lots of Bill Malden cartoons in the book. I have one painting and one photograph. The painting is Norman Rockwell's famous Homecoming. There it is. Thank you. Thank you. This was on the Saturday Evening Post cover. It was used to sell war bonds. It was all over the place and is a remarkable painting. But if you look really carefully at it and you put away all the myths about heroism and victory, what do you see? You see a sad soldier, and he can't quite cross the line to greet his family, which is delighted that he's home in one piece. And he doesn't know how he's going to cross that line, what he's going to do. Look at him. He's weighed down. He's weighed down by his baggage. He's frightened. One thinks you can't see his face. And Rockwell did that intentionally. We don't know what he's thinking. We can guess because he hasn't crossed the line to greet his family.
So, as you mentioned, you feature quite a number of very poignant Bill Malden cartoons in the book. And I want to start my first question by showing one here with a soldier, presumably a homeless soldier, sleeping on a pedestal that says "The Unknown Soldier." That's the caption, "The Unknown Soldier, 1946." But he's sort of a statue of him, but he's really just a guy who doesn't know where to go. And Tom Brokaw coined the phrase "the greatest generation" to describe those who took part in World War II. But as they were coming home, they certainly didn't see themselves that way. And they certainly weren't treated that way, at least not always, were they?
No. You know, the war, again, we historians, you know, except for the two of you, have spent much too much time blaming the White House and the War Department and for censoring the information the home front got. But by late 1943, that wasn't the case anymore, because Marshall knew, and Eisenhower knew, and Brady knew, and FDR knew that the war was going to go on a lot longer than the American public expected it to. Once Mussolini is out of the way, we've landed in Italy, conquered North Africa, no problems there. The American public is ready to shout, hurrah, the war is over. Those who are fighting the war know that's not the case. And they've somehow got to show the home front what our guys are up against in the Pacific. This is before D-Day. In the Pacific, in Europe, the boot of Italy. And they begin to allow Bill Malden to do whatever he wants. Patton wants to get rid of him. Eisenhower protects him. They allow Ernie Pyle and all sorts of correspondents to write what they see and to interview the Marines and the GIs and the air boys and the sailors and tell their stories. And they allow Life magazine to run a photo of a dead GI. And they allow the newsreels. God, you watch the newsreels in 1944 and you hear Lowell Thomas intone. You know, he describes what's going on in that voice of God narration. But you see these guys trudging through the mud, through the snow. You see the grimaces, the pain on their face. So the home front is frightened, and it should be frightened. What's going to happen to our loved ones? Are they going to come home? Are they going to come home in one piece? Are they going to walk in the front door? And what's happened to them? They've been away for so long. They've learned to kill. They've seen people kill. They've seen people die, horrible deaths, you know. They're not going to be the same. And Bill Malden says that in one of this, I quote this in the book. He says at war's end, he says, the veterans who returned home, and he's telling the home front this, he's telling the loved ones this. He says the veterans who returned home were not the ones who left for war. They are very different now. Don't let anybody tell you they aren't. Some say the American soldier is the same clean-cut young man who left his home. They are wrong.
So, David, but is there something about this moment or this conflict that causes either officialdom in Washington or the media or what to start to change this perception of the war? Because, you know, you also talk in the book about, you know, earlier in the war, correspondents were like, no dead bodies, no bad stories about what's happening to our guys. You can't talk about fraternization, all these things you cannot talk about.
Right.
So why is this war different? Why are they now saying we have to start to try to prepare the American people for this?
Because the war is being fought on the home front. We are supplying not only the American army, but the Canadian army, the Russian army, the British army with munitions. And if there is any slackening of effort on the home front, if there is any slackening of effort overseas, the war is going to go on forever or be lost. And FDR in particular, and Marshall, they're scared to death that the American people are going to say, okay, let's have a truce. You know, let's have a truce. we don't have to, we said unconditional surrender, but that it's not going to work. So the American people have to know how difficult it is, and the war is going to keep going on, and they've got to buy war bonds, and the kids have to pick up scrap metal, and the men and women in the war plants have to keep working, and they have to accept overtime work, and they have to get to work every day. And the best way to do that, the War Department understands, Stimson understands. The best way to do that is to show what's going on. And if our guys can track through the mud and the snow and fight malaria and typhus and an enemy, two enemies, then we at home have to do our part.
I want to come back to the veterans coming home and actually grab this quote, a comment that came in from a viewer, from Jim Stark, who says, "Can't wait to hear how the World War II veterans were treated. We Vietnam vets took serious abuse." And you make the point in the book that some of the World War II veterans are saying, "Hey, nobody threw a parade for me."
Yeah. The veterans, there was this saying among some of the veterans, we don't want a parade, and we're happy that there's no parade. We just want to get home. And when they had to march in parades honoring the generals, they were not, happy warriors. They came home. And we've got to remember. We've got to remember, and we historians have to make this clear, that what was the prelude to the war? Depression. We only come out of the Depression because of war production, and because we take 16.4 million and throw them into uniform. The veterans are asked, but just as they become veterans, in June of 1945, those guys who had come home and been discharged, the Army did a survey. Thank God for these surveys, for the historians. The Stauffer, Stouffer, who writes 2 volumes on the American GI and runs this incredible research department, he finds that 56% of the veterans in June 1945 anticipated depression. Only 15% are undivided, which means that less than 30%, if my math is right, less than 30% aren't afraid that they're going to be greeted by depression when they get home. The government is preparing for depression. Okay. So these guys come home and they don't think they're going to get jobs. Number one. Number two, there is the worst housing crisis, the worst housing shortage this country has ever seen. Why? Well, thank you. Why? Because no homes are built during the Depression. And certainly no housing is built except, Quonset huts and barracks for some war workers. No housing that's going to last is built during the war. So these guys come home and they face a shortage of jobs, of housing, of cars, of suits, of white shirts, you name it. And, they're not particularly happy with it.
So, David, I mean, and as it should, but we have a perception now of the war and the veterans coming home and what they thought and felt. You paint a much different picture, right? And it's much more confusing. It's much more difficult. There was the quote. You were talking about statistics. One of the ones I found very fascinating. You says a quote taken of returning soldiers in 1945. When asked if the Army had hurt them more than it had helped, 58% answered hurt. 61% said that they were more bitter and cynical than they'd been before induction. 76% that they were more nervous and restless. 41% that they were now less self-confident or less sure of themselves. 47% that they had acquired a lot of bad habits. 54% got angry more quickly, and 49% drank more. Were you, as you approach this topic, because again, we all have perceptions of the war, were you at all surprised with kind of some of the bitterness and angst, or did you expect to find that?
No, I didn't expect to find it, and I wasn't looking for it. What I did know was that, and I know this from my own father. My father came back from the war. He was a 35-year-old New York lawyer. I don't think he had ever been out of New York City in Brooklyn. Maybe he'd been to Jersey City. He's drafted. He becomes a driver because he can't do stenography and he can't type. They don't know what to do with him. They certainly, looking at him, know he's not going to, shouldn't be on the front lines. He's a driver for 6 months. He drives for Colonel Howard Hutter, Hutter. Hutter goes overseas to North Africa to run a hospital. He says to my father, "This is a waste. I'm sending you to OCS." He goes to OCS. He comes out a medical supply officer and immediately is shipped from South Carolina, where he's in OCS, to Eritrea to dismantle a hospital because the troops had moved on to Sicily and then they were going into Italy. That's all I know, except I know some of this from my mother, some from my brother. He comes back early on a full medical discharge, full disability. He has a heart condition. He's an alcoholic. He's smoking 4 or 5 packs of Luckies a day. And I discover, as a kid, I didn't put it together until much later. I stole a pair of socks from him as a teenager, and I went into his sock drawer and I saw the biggest bottle of pills I had ever seen. And years later, my brother said, yeah, he could not get to sleep without heavy sedation. And the sedation was so heavy that when he woke up in the morning, he had to take uppers to get out of bed and through the day, and then take his sedatives to get to sleep at night. Now, I want to make one thing abundantly clear here. I think you can be a wounded generation and the greatest generation at the same time. Mm-hmm. I wanted to focus on guys like my father, and there are millions of them. And what's important about my father and the millions of other members of the wounded generation, they come back with traumas. They come back with PTSD. They come back with survivor's guilt. And we can go through all the rest. Mm. They come back unable to connect to their loved ones. There were more divorces in 1946 than there had ever been and would ever be till the late 60s, when divorce was accepted as a way of life. Yeah. Mm. They try to get help, or they try to tough it out. But those who try to get help are told you've got battle fatigue, combat fatigue. If you have fatigue, you sleep, you rest. Well, they didn't get over it. And they realized that they had to cure themselves. And how did they do that? They threw themselves into work. They threw themselves into family life. They threw themselves into school. They distracted themselves. They didn't talk about the war with their kids, like me. Yeah. They didn't talk about the war with their wives, with their friends, except those who were veterans. They locked themselves inside on July 4th so they didn't hear explosions. They didn't watch the movies, read about the war. And they survived. They were the greatest generation in doing so, in not only surviving, but becoming extraordinarily productive.
Right.
Yeah, it reminds me of this Bill Malden cartoon that you included. We ain't no lost generation. We just been mislaid.
Yeah.
And they had to go and find themselves. One of the soldiers that I interviewed for my film about the Ghost Army, cheers, Chris,
Yeah.
was Arthur Shilstone, and he talked about coming home. And I just want to play that soundbite for you.
The day I got out of the Army, I think was the happiest day of my life. It wasn't the day that I got married or when my first son was born or anything else. It was when I got out of the Army.
Yeah, so he took some heat from his wife and son when they first saw that documentary film and saw that quote in there. But it was the happiest day of his life for him, maybe not for everybody, but that process of getting out of the Army wasn't easy for anybody, was it?
No, it wasn't easy for anybody because Stimson and Marshall and Truman and the entire War Department understand that they've won the war, now they got to win the peace. And that means a large occupation army in Europe and in the Pacific. The draft, was Congress didn't want to continue to draft the draft, and nobody was enlisting. So what did that mean? You had two choices: either cut back the size of the occupation army, or keep the veterans or the veteran soldiers. They weren't veterans yet, but they had been there for years. Keep them overseas. And what happened? I mean, this is an extraordinary story, and it's not told often enough. Two things happened. First, the GIs and the Marines revolt. There's a rebellion, and discipline breaks down totally, and the guys demonstrate. They corner Eleanor Roosevelt when she goes to London. They corner Robert Patterson, who's later becomes the war.
They corner Eisenhower in the Capitol, or their wives do.
They corner Eisenhower. So it's the guys overseas, and it's the women at home who form moms clubs, and they organize, and they, cause hell. They petition, they write, they scream, they threaten. They corner Eisenhower when he's on his way to give congressional testimony after just being named chief of staff. They corner him, and they say, "No, you're not going into the interview room to talk to the congressman till you talk to us." And eventually, the government has to change its plans reluctantly, cut back the size of the occupation army. Still, it takes more than a year, close to 2 years, before all the guys are home.
Yeah. And speaking of coming home, David, you say in the book, you say no one in Washington and few amongst the general public had forgotten what had happened in 1932 when World War veterans thrown out of work by the Depression marched on Washington. Recurring memories of the protesting veterans, destitute and desperate, would haunt the public and politicians for years to come. So what was prepared for the veterans, at least initially, when they're coming home, and how much of that was based on fear and how much of that was based on altruism?
That's a great question, and I can't answer it directly. I can say both, and. What happens is the GI Bill, it's not only the bonus marchers, it's those who understood a little bit of history, knew that disgruntled veterans in Italy and Germany after World War I were the bulwark of the fascist and Nazi movements. So there's genuine fear because, again, there aren't going to be jobs for these guys. There aren't going to be houses for these guys. There aren't going to be cars and white shirts for these guys. So the Congress, as it does too often, meanders. There's hundreds of bills sliding through, getting lost in committee. The American Legion says no. And the American Legion pulls itself together. It says we've got thousands of disabled soldiers who are already coming back in 1944, before D-Day, and we got to do something about them. And the American Legion says we need one big GI Bill. And FDR, who has somewhat different ideas, and the congressmen get together and they write a GI Bill. Now, the GI Bill is written, one, to reward our veterans. That's the altruism. Americans have always rewarded our veterans one way or another. From the American Revolution to the Civil War, they got land bounties, they got, medical help, they got free burials, they got any number of things. We're going to help our veterans through the GI Bill. But more importantly, or as importantly, what is the GI Bill going to do? It's going to give a year of unemployment compensation. What is to the vets who are coming back? What does that mean? That means they don't have to look for a job for a year. Now, most of them never take the unemployment insurance for a year. They get bored, they get tired, their wives throw them out of the house. Their fathers, there's one great story I tell in the book where a father says to his son, who's just come back, we don't have any bums in this family. I don't care what money is available, you get a job, kid. And then the GI Bill gives these vets 4 years of free tuition, whether they go to a vocational school to learn radio repair or auto mechanics, or whether they go to a 4-year school, or whether they go to law school or medical school, 4 years. And what's as important as those 4 years are the living allowances they get to support themselves, to support their families. So you put together the year of unemployment compensation, the 4 years of schooling, right? And you got 5 years before these guys are going to go on the unemployment line. And by that time, it is assumed, and it happens sooner, by that time it's assumed that the transition from a war economy to a peace economy will have taken place.
So we have a whole exchange of comments going on online about everything that you're talking about. But one of the most interesting sets of comments that's coming out, I was just trying to see if I could find this comment, and I went away from the screen for a moment and it's disappeared. But somebody talked about the fact that there were African-American veterans who came home and had a difficult time, some who were even murdered. Here it is. It's from David Picker, that they suffered appalling abuse. And you have a whole parallel track in your book, almost every part of it. And I really appreciated this, talking about how the experience of African Americans was different, how segregation injured them, how even when it came to the point system at the end of the war, that discriminated against them. I mean, they kind of take it in the solar plexus on all these issues. Can you touch on that a little bit? And maybe, I know you talk about in the book, Isaac Woodward, maybe include him in your answer.
Sure. The American Army is a segregated army. The American military is segregated. From training camp to the ships that bring them overseas and bring them back to the camps overseas, it's segregated. There is this ridiculous sentiment that Black soldiers, Black Marines, Black sailors can't do combat. They're going to fall apart. So up until the end of the war, with the exception of the Tuskegee Airmen, there are no Blacks in combat. At the end of the war, in the last year of the war, when white replacements are at a premium, Eisenhower invites Black soldiers to volunteer for combat, and they do in extraordinary numbers. While they're overseas, however, there are two things that happen. One, they live in villages, towns, cities in the Pacific and in Europe, where white supremacy is not taken for granted, number one, and where there are no Jim Crow laws, where they are looked upon first as soldiers, second as Americans, third as people with dark skins. When they come home, they're going to remember that. And when they come home, having risked their lives for their country, they demand full citizenship rights. The South, the Southern politicians, the police chiefs, civilians, they know what's coming, and they prepare. And they prepare with violence, And it becomes clear to the soldiers, a lot of whom, the black soldiers, none of the World War, this is important, but it appears trivial at first. None of the World War II soldiers could fit into their civilian clothes. They'd been away for 3 years. They'd grown muscle, they'd gotten skinnier, they'd grown bigger. 18-year-olds had changed their body shapes when they got home and they were 21. But there was a shortage of clothes and it cost a lot of money. The black soldiers had no choice but to wear their uniforms. And to wear their uniforms was a direct provocation. And when they refused wearing their uniforms to sit in the back of the bus or to say, sir, to the bus driver or the police officer, they got beat up badly. Isaac Woodward was blinded. I mean, for life. And the story of Isaac Woodward was such that, from Orson Welles, who had a radio program all across the country, people came out and said, this is wrong. This has to stop. Paul Robeson led a contingent to meet with Truman. Walter White, the head of the AACP, goes to Truman, and they say, we need federal legislation to stop lynching and to stop the violence. And Truman listens and says, it's not going to be done. It's not going to be done. The worst part of this story, I think, is the discrimination of the GI Bill. The GI Bill can't get passed without the support of Southerners, Southern Democrats, and Midwestern Republicans. And the Southern Democrats are damn sure that they are not going to let legislation through that's going to change the racial status quo in the South. So the bill is written in such a way that the federal government and the VA serves as the banker, but the paymaster who gives out the money are local officials. So if you're a black veteran, you're a black veteran, you want to go to school. Well, in 17 states of this nation, segregation is the law of the land. If you're a white veteran, you're welcomed into the University of Missouri, to Alabama, Mississippi, the private schools. If you're a black veteran, the only place you're going to get in to use your GI Bills are the historically black colleges, which can only take a minority. They're too small to take more than that. So the white soldiers, the white veterans jump a class, many of them. From working people to they get their college degrees, they become professionals. Blacks are comparatively left behind. If you want me to keep talking, I'll talk about mortgages, which are
I was gonna actually kind of add on to that, because you say it's a very dark story, but things change. You say, for those who honored, respected, and hoped to sustain the racial status quo in the southern states, World War II would be somewhat of a disaster. So, why can we talk about how bad it was, but why was it a disaster for the segregation?
Because these guys came back. You look at the honor roll of civil rights leaders, from Medgar Evers to Amzie Moore to all of Martin Luther King's lieutenants. They were all veterans. They waited a decade. They came back. They tried to register to vote. They tried to organize people. They realized that they weren't going to win. They went back to school. They got degrees. They became businessmen. And then when Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in the middle 50s begins to protest and make changes, the veterans are there. They give up their businesses. They join the ranks of the civil rights movement. They are organized and they make an enormous difference. But it's not until the 1950s. There's a decade in between. Now, I don't want to say that a lot of Black veterans understand that they've got to move to the North, where they can go to school. And a significant number get their degrees in the North. And a smaller number get their degrees in the South. They find their way into the historically Black colleges. Edward Brooke, future senator from Massachusetts. Yeah, his mom and dad want him to stay in Washington, D.C. And he says, no, I can't live here. He goes north, gets his degree, and becomes a senator. There are stories like that. Overall, I think that the mortgage guarantees, which are written into the GI Bill, probably make the largest change in the post-war period. But the mortgage guarantees means that, a lot of the soldiers came back and they said, oh, the government's going to give me a mortgage. No. You get the mortgage from your local bank, and then the government guarantees it at low interest rates. If you're a Black veteran anywhere in this country, you're going to have a rough time getting a mortgage, number one. And number two, it takes 4 or 5 years before the developers like the Levitts begin to understand that there is a huge market of veterans with GI Bill mortgage guarantees who can afford houses in the suburbs in developments like Levittown. And they begin to build developments all over the country, not just on Long Island and Philadelphia. And there are other developers who do the same all across the country. Universally, those housing units and those developments are segregated. And Black veterans can't find their way in to Levittown or to the Levittowns across the country. Therefore, they can't use their mortgage guarantees.
Well, it's a very sad tale, and it's one that you tell kind of across the board from the time during the war to the end of the war, and I appreciate that being in there. There's another group of people I want to talk about who you touch base on. The phrase PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, wasn't coined until 35 years after World War II. But a lot of these soldiers suffer from it. And you specifically have a figure in the book, a couple of different figures, but they suggest that something like 30% of the casualties that are coming home are from psychiatric disorders. And then there's all the people with problems that are never diagnosed. So how does this play out as people are coming home, starting during the war and then after the war as well?
The selective service, sometimes gets things wrong. The Selective Service said to the military, to the War Department and the generals, we made a mistake in World War I, and we let in a lot of guys who were psychologically weak, and they broke down. So this time around, every draft board is going to have a psychiatrist, and that psychiatrist is going to figure out whether these guys can be soldiers. So at Guadalcanal, the first land battle, the commanders, the Marines, and then the GI commanding officers in the field, they are shocked when guys begin to break down. When you look at what these guys went through on Guadalcanal, it becomes clear why people broke down. But they broke down not only with malaria and typhus and wounds and fear, but they were considered ineffective because their minds went. Their minds went. They would stare, they would stop eating, they would stare into the sky. They were removed from the front line, sent for help. They were given help, rest and relaxation, then sent back to Guadalcanal. And 2 weeks later, a month later, they would break down again. The number of evacuees from Guadalcanal and from every in the first 2 years of the war throughout the Pacific and in North Africa and Italy was extraordinary. Guys broke down. And it didn't mean that their minds were weak or that they were neurotic before they went into the army. The stresses of this war were absolutely extraordinary. The stresses of climate, of disease, of injury, of the fear. You know, in previous wars, if you were on the front line, you were in the range of the enemy. But in World War II, you could be anywhere, and bombs could fall on your head. Artillery from battleships could get to you. You were expendable, as any number of great writers who were soldiers explained. And that caused post-traumatic stress disorder. And nobody knew how to deal with it.
So, David, I want to, because it's such a huge thing, and this is the part of the conversation where I insert there's so much more in this book that you have to read.
Absolutely.
So we are missing a lot. But I want to get back to the GI Bill and this whole idea of benefits, because there's a quote in here from Franklin Roosevelt that I was startled by. And it's going to introduce a bit of a what if sort of scenario, but as it applies to the GI Bill, you have Roosevelt addressing the American Legion on October 1933. So he's talking to largely World War I veterans at this point. He says the first principle is that government has a responsibility for and toward those who suffered injury or contracted disease while serving in the country's defense. The second principle is that no person, because he wore a uniform, must thereafter be placed in a special class of beneficiaries over and above all other citizens. The fact of wearing a uniform does not mean that he can demand and receive from his government a benefit which no other citizen receives. That really shocked me. And you say that, kind of Roosevelt has a somewhat different view, but these two principles kind of govern sort of how he views the benefit system. So clearly it doesn't turn out that way.
Yeah.
So how does that change happen? And what do you think the post-war situation would have looked like if Roosevelt is actually introducing this legislation?
It's a great question and a difficult question. Roosevelt does not. Hoover's defeated in part because of the bonus army. And Roosevelt doesn't give the World War I veterans their bonuses, just like Hoover. Roosevelt believes that military service is your due. You shouldn't be rewarded for it. If you get injured, we'll take care of you. But we're not going to go beyond that. And he says that in the beginning. As the war goes on and on and on and on, as the injuries mount, as the evacuees grow in number, as the American Legion gets stronger and stronger, as the soldiers overseas and their wives and their loved ones contact their congressman, Roosevelt realizes he's wrong. He's not going to win this fight. He doesn't win this fight from the very beginning. In the very beginning, he tries to get legislation through that will give pensions and medical help to war workers in factories who were disabled, as well as veterans who were disabled. And that's going to be run through the White House. It doesn't happen that way. Congress says, no, we are going to provide special help, more help to the veterans, and the VA is going to run this program. Roosevelt gives in, but Roosevelt believes, and there are a lot of other people who believe, including the members of the American Veterans. I'm forgetting the name of the organization, the alternative to the American Legion, the left.
The Veterans of Foreign Wars?
No,
No.
it's not the VFW. I'll think of it. But Roosevelt's son and Ronald Reagan and Audie Murphy, they're parts of this group. And they say we're citizens first, veterans second. Whatever we get, the country should get. And Roosevelt says over and over and over again, we're in this together. And yet, in the end, Congress and the American Legion win, and they pass a bill that creates the grandest, most generous, most comprehensive social welfare program for veterans. And Roosevelt and people in his cabinet believe this is the opening gun. We're giving aid, free tuition to the veterans. We're going to expand that and give it to all citizens. We're giving medical help to the veterans. We're going to have a medical program, a healthcare program. We're giving special mortgages. We're going to expand that. But it happens a little bit. But the dream that Roosevelt had, that there would be a comprehensive social welfare program for all Americans, because all Americans had contributed to the war effort, is sidelined from the very beginning.
There's so much more in this book. We haven't even touched on alcohol, experiences of gay soldiers. All of this is stuff that they uncover. What struck me reading your book is that the war, even for soldiers who weren't wounded, who weren't killed, who came back and seemed like they were in pretty good shape, that the war is a huge trauma, a huge disruption of people's normal lives that reverberates down through the years, through wives, through children, and perhaps grandchildren. Honestly, its effect do you think its effect is still felt today?
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking to a lot of people about this book all over the country. And people raise questions, they talk to me, and then they email me. And they tell me stories about their fathers, their grandparents, their uncles, and how the effect of the war, was carried on. Look, we lose sight of the fact that in World War II, 1/3 of males over 15 fought in the war in uniform. That's 3 times greater than in World War I. In World War II, the average duration in uniform in the military, this is the average, is almost 3 years. In World War I, it's a year. In World War I, about half of the soldiers went overseas, and they were there for less than 6 months. In World War II, 3/4 end up overseas, and they're there for an average of almost a year and a half. In Vietnam, it's a year. In World War II, there's no limit on how long you can be at the front. The Army learns that they can't do that anymore. And in Korea and Vietnam, you're pulled off the front for R&R after a certain period. That doesn't happen in World War II. We forget in World War II, because it's a global war on two fronts, that 17 to 19 million able-bodied men are given exemptions because they need to work in the factories. Included among them are all the tobacco farmers who were not drafted so that they can produce billions of cigarettes. 65 to 70 billion cigarettes for, the veterans overseas. So the duration, the ferocity of this war is unparalleled.
David Nasaw, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you,
today
David.
to talk about your recent book, your new book, The Wounded Generation, Coming Home After World War II. Terrific book, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to read this book.
I really found it eye-opening. I know we've had some viewers who said they found it eye-opening, some others who've said they want to look at it. We highly recommend that you look at this book. And David, maybe you've got enough material coming in your emails and contacts that there's a volume 2 ahead of you.
Yeah, after a long hiatus.
You can work on that. And maybe, Pulitzer Prize, maybe the third time's the charm. So we'll be rooting for you. Okay.
Thank you.
So
Thank you,
David, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Oh, I cut him off. Oh, well, bad timing. Sorry, David. So Chris, we have next week, we are continuing on with World War II. We're going to have to do something from the Middle Ages soon to break it up, but we're continuing on with World War II. And we're bringing back Saul David, who has been on twice before and returns for his third visit to HHH to talk about his book, Tunisgrad, Victory in Africa. So I know Saul's he turns them out, man. I mean, this is his third book that he's had on since we've been doing the show, but they're good, right? He really, he's got it.
Another aspect of the war that really just doesn't get the attention it should. So
I have a friend, wow, this is years ago, but I was talking about the war in North Africa. And this is a guy who really knowledgeable about history. And he's like, we fought in North Africa. And he was knowledgeable. He'd taken history at school. I was shocked that he didn't know, but I think a lot of people still don't know about the year or so that we spent fighting in North Africa from November 42. I guess it's not a year, right? It's November 42 to July, August 43. Yeah. And so we're going to dive into that story, and both the British and the Americans, and undoubtedly the Canadians. I'm sure they're there.
Well, I'll find a way to work them in, even though. And as a teaser, I know that Saul says things about General Mark Clark that aren't the things that normally are said. So
are these positive things? Is he saying?
I will let you
positive things. Do you have to tune into the show to find out?
I think you do.
Okay, fair enough.
I think you do.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon, please back us on Patreon, and take a look at our 276 other shows. You can find them all at historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.